There have been a number of comments recently on the Apollo moon landings. Mr. Phineas asked, "Do you believe NASA put men on the moon who brought lunar rock specimens back to Earth? I don't." Caleb van der Wolf said, "I have been trying to research the Van Allen belt, as there is much controversy and contradiction on this subject. Some say any craft would be destroyed trying to go through it, and some say the radiation is mild and would have little effect. The radiation of the Van Allen belts seems to play a large role in most of the comments questioning the Apollo landings. So let's look at what the experts tell us about the Van Allen belts, and you can decide whether you think they might be believable. The Van Allen belts are donut-shaped belts all round the equator. The lower belt stretches from about 1,000 kilometres to about 12,000 kilometres in altitude. The upper from about 13,000 to 60,000 kilometres altitude. These altitudes can vary depending mainly on the Sun's activity. The inner belt contains mainly protons. The outer contains mainly electrons and ions. Low Earth orbit satellites like Starlink fly at altitudes between 160 kilometres and 2,000 kilometres, so the higher ones encounter the lower belt. Medium orbit satellites like GPS fly at altitudes between 2,000 and 35,000 kilometres, so they encounter either or both belts. Geostationary orbits have elevation 35,786 kilometres and are constantly in the middle of the upper belt. As far as the Apollo missions are concerned, as with most rocket launches, they were launched as near to the equator as feasible, to use as little fuel as possible to reach escape velocity. So they had to pass through both of the Van Allen belts. Let's see what Google has to say about health problems with radiation. Radiation sickness occurs when you have been exposed to around 200 to 1,000 rads of radiation within a few hours. Apollo 11 crew were within the belts for less than 2 hours during their journey to the moon, and so would have only been exposed to an estimated 18 rads, well within the safe limit. There can still be some adverse effects from even this level of radiation. So NASA made sure that the Apollo 11 spacecraft was well insulated, such that the average dose of radiation over the 12-day mission was just 0.18 rads, or similar to the radiation dosage from a chest X-ray. One of the big objections to the Apollo missions is that they could not have survived the trip through the Van Allen belts. There seems to be considerable disagreement about the details. They depend on the activity of the Sun. If we don't believe Google on this, then we need to look for other estimates which we might consider more reliable. But one thing seems quite reasonable to me. If this story is anywhere near true, the middle of the outer belt is likely to have plenty of damaging radiation. The outer belt has high-energy electrons, which can cause charge build-up in insulators and subsequent discharges and damage to electronic equipment. All geostationary orbits are right there in the middle of it all the time. Geostationary satellites are there to constantly receive and transmit electronic images and radio signals. So if the radiation were really very bad, it seems a little surprising to me that their highly miniaturized, high-tech equipment can carry on working for years. I remember the Apollo 11 moon landing very well. I and 3 friends were sitting around a table listening to the radio. I had a few ham radio friends who were also listening, and there were a whole lot more I didn't know, with even more powerful equipment, who were listening. And the Russian watchdogs were also listening. There was huge rivalry between the Russian space program and the American space program. The 2 superpowers were competing for prestige in many emerging countries. Russia was rapidly expanding its power and influence, particularly in Africa and in the Far East. Those were the days before the Chernobyl disaster effectively bankrupted the Soviet Union, and Russia faded from the superpower status. When Russia made a launch, the Americans monitored the trajectory and every radio signal. They hoped to find something going wrong. When the Americans made a launch, the Russians did the same. The Russians never claimed the moonshot was a fraud. Soon after the landing, they published a short note in the government mouthpiece, Pravda, congratulating the Americans on landing, but pointing out that returning back to Earth would be very challenging. One of the first things Neil Armstrong said after his famous one small step speech was about scuffing the dust with his boot. He said, "I only go in a small fraction of an inch, maybe an eighth of an inch." I didn't realise the significance of that at the time, but I did later, when I examined photographs of the moon lander. The lander had huge pads designed to sit on the thick layer of soft dust, which was supposed to be there. The moon was supposed to be billions of years old. Space dust should have been falling on the surface at about the same rate at that which had been measured for the Earth. But unlike the Earth, the moon has no atmosphere, no wind, no rain, nothing to move it around or compact it. So there should have been a thick layer of loose dust everywhere. I was an avid science fiction reader in those days. It was a time when science fiction was about science and was written by scientists like Fred Hoyle and Isaac Asimov. Arthur C. Clarke, another physicist, was one of the best. He would study progress of science and write about possible future applications, like communication satellites, long before anyone else had even thought of them. He wrote a book, A Fall of Moon Dust, about establishing a space station on the moon. There was a moon rover designed to move over the soft, thick layer of loose dust. Unforeseen things happened, and it sank deep into the dust, and a rescue mission had to race to save the trapped passengers. But the Apollo lander didn't find any loose dust for those huge pads to rest on. And Armstrong, who'd been warned of the possibility of sinking into a great depth of loose dust, could scuff through about an eighth of an inch of it to solid ground beneath. In doing so, he demolished all those billions of years. I've subsequently found that when scientists make predictions which are soundly falsified, there's a standard procedure. They look for some obscure crackpot, Dr. X, who'd gone against the consensus and proposed the opposite. So then they can say, there was no surprise because that amazing scientist Dr. X had predicted it. But I never heard an explanation of how the moon could be billions of years old without that thick layer of dust. But getting back to the photographs, most of the arguments I've heard about the moon landing being a fraud are centred on the photographs. One problem I've seen proposed is that there are shadows in two directions, showing that two lights were used for a photo shoot in a desert in America. In this picture, the leg of the lander seems to have shadows in two directions, but the sun is low in the sky, and on closer inspection, we see one of those shadows is not the shadow of the lander's leg, but of a small ridge of dust. Another query was about the photos of footprints on the moon. Both Armstrong and Aldrin were given special overshoes to put over their spacesuit boots to grip the expected loose dust. They made rather impressive footprints. To lighten the load to take off, they left behind everything they did not need for the return flight, including those overshoes. The normal spacesuit boots have a completely different print, so there have been claims that the photos must be fraudulent. The idea that the photographs were taken in America, not on the moon, come from the fact that field trials are done to simulate future landings. Let's see what NASA has to say about these field trials. NASA is conducting extensive field tests in the Arizona desert to prepare for the Artemis missions, with the most recent simulations occurring in May 2024. The Arizona desert is used because its rugged, cratered terrain and volcanic features closely resemble the lunar surface, particularly the region near the moon's south pole where Artemis 3 will land. NASA has used the Arizona desert for lunar landings since the Apollo era, and the current Artemis program continues this tradition to ensure the safety and success of future lunar exploration. So the Apollo missions did extensive testing, and as with the Artemis tests, they would have taken lots of photos. Could it be that some of these photos from the Arizona desert were published as moon photos? I downloaded one photo which looks very suspicious. The lighting looks different to most of the Apollo 11 moonshots. And look at the flag. There's a metal rod at the top of the flag to make it stand out instead of just hanging down. But on the moon, that rod got quite badly bent, and the flag looks quite different. It also looks a bit closer to the lander than the other photos, and the pole seems to be bending under the weight of the flag. Could it be possible that this photo might be from a trial run in the desert? But I then discovered that this photo actually comes from Apollo 15 mission. The caption is wrong. So could all the confusion come from mix-ups like this? I can't say decisively, but there's one thing about all this that really strikes me. Space probes have searched the solar system and found that all of the planets are utterly unsuitable for life. The only bodies on which it appears possible for man to survive are the Moon and Mars. In both cases, the problems to be overcome are enormous, and living there would be incredibly difficult, inconvenient, dangerous, and unpleasant. Astronomers have been telling us about far-away exoplanets. Since their model of the universe has been totally disproved, I don't know if we can have any confidence in anything they say. But their exoplanets seem to be even more unsuitable for life. Even the astronomers seem to be coming to the realization that the Earth is a very special place. The conditions required for life to be possible are so extraordinary and unlikely that the Earth is in every way a miracle. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He hath established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. Thank you for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and press the bell so that you'll be notified as I release new movies. If you'd like to support this project, you're welcome to do so through Patreon. Find a link on my channel banner and in the description below.